If there's one thing that is really misunderstood and undervalued today, it's the place of weakness in the Christian life. And it's so easy to do that. We're part of a materialistic culture, which basically means success is seen in things that are big, things that are strong, things that are impressive. So your value in the workplace generally is to do with how well you're doing your job, how well you're appreciated, but also how rapidly you're moving up the ladder. And in terms of your conversations, so often with your friends and your peers and your family, it's about what you have and how good it is and how impressive it is. The New Testament presents to us a view of the Christian life that literally turns all of that on its head. Paul boasts about his weakness. When he goes to Corinth, he says, when I was with you with much fear and trembling. He says about the fact that his speech was not impressive. If he put that down on his CV, I'm not sure how many Christian conferences would really invite him along as, let's get Paul, he's great. He's the guy when he comes up to speak, he shakes a lot and his speech really isn't very impressive. It's not the sort of thing that sells, and yet it's precisely the thing that God uses. And I think Paul had to learn weakness, and he learnt it in a very, very painful way. I mean, when he starts 2 Corinthians, he's facing huge rejection of his ministry, but also huge rejection of him personally. His critics, the so-called super apostles, the guys in the Armani suits and driving the big cars and the big smiles and all the rest of it, the really impressive people, had an obvious target in Paul. He's always getting into trouble. He's in trouble with the authorities. He's getting shipwrecked. He's thrown into prison. When you hear him speak, well, it says in 2 Corinthians, they regarded him as, his speech has been unimpressive. He's really not much to look at. And yet, as Paul unpacks that for us, and he doesn't hide his weaknesses. So he speaks about, again, right at the beginning of 2 Corinthians in chapter 1, about his own personal crisis and meltdown when he was in Asia, about how he felt within himself the sentence of death, despaired even of life itself. He's basically telling us he felt suicidal in Christian ministry under the strain and the issues that he was facing. He doesn't hide that. He acknowledges that, but he doesn't leave us there. And this is the big thing about weakness. It's through weakness we discover the power and the strength of God. This happens so that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. Now that's massive, isn't it? And this is something that we miss so often in terms of our understanding of the Christian life. What does maturity and development look like in the Christian life? I actually think that real Christian maturity, Calvin had it so right, didn't he, when he spoke about it's about the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves. And in one way, maturity in the Christian life is about growing in our knowledge of the majesty, the glory, and the wonder of God in the face of Christ, but also just how weak I am. For when we're weak, then we're strong. God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. And I honestly think this is something we've not taken seriously, and if we do, it will rewrite so much of what we are saying has been said today about the need for strong leadership. We actually don't need strong leadership. We need weak leaders who are strong in their confidence in the grace of God. Because there is something mysterious about this, that God can take a fearful, shaking preacher like Paul, whose speech is not particularly impressive, but he can so fill him with the Spirit of God that when he speaks of Christ, people's lives are transformed and affected. So again, it's no surprise, is it, that he says he's chosen the weak things of the world to confound the strong. And again, this is something that I think tragically we overlook. I refer to it as the necessary power of weakness. It's counterintuitive, it's countercultural, And we have to be very careful how we handle it, because if we don't get the balance right, we can find ourselves glorying in I'm no good. We do this really well in Wales. We really do. The Celtic melancholia. I suffer from it, and you know, oh, that was no good, I'm rubbish. That's an unhealthy understanding of weakness. It's unbiblical, it's not constructive. But just a general awareness of who we really are. And that our needs, I think, when we look at leaders and leaders in church, and we need to look at people who know they're weak, but also know that God is strong and mighty, and He is the one who delights to take the weak things of the world to confound the strong. So weakness, yeah, I think it is underrated, and it's hugely valuable, and ultimately in God's hands, hugely powerful.